right. Me first.
Yes.
Okay. So last time on the Make Love Easy podcast. So last time we were having a conversation. A 1 hour conversation turned into a 2 hour conversation, turned into a we need part two. And in that first conversation, we covered a lot of things about how to be trauma aware in the world and trauma aware in the world of dating, interacting with women who may have had traumatic experiences, trauma histories, um, and and acknowledging also the trauma that men might have experienced and brought into their dating experience too. So we covered things like what it is to be embodied instead of creating intellectual strategies. We covered kind of basic statistics, like understanding the statistics of what safety looks like for women, what women are carrying as they're perceiving the world. Um, we created this baseline intention of what would it look like if we if we approached this type of dating as a way of evolving, if we approached dating someone with a trauma history as a way of really using the gifts that trauma can offer, um, and using those to be able to become the highest version of ourselves, the version with the most integrity. And then we talked about some of the specifics of that, what the principles of trauma informed care are and how they actually really highly apply to dating. We talked about kind of reframing some of the myths of and some of the social commentary around women's choices, women's clothes, women's, just like the perception of women. And then we talked about what it looks like to go back to the point of safety when something has kind of crossed a line, what it looks like to not get distracted by all of the details of it, but to kind of go backward until the first point that safety left, and to be able to really understand and perceive from that place. What else am I missing? We had a rich 2 hour conversation with a lot more tangents in it than that.
Oh, we did indeed. I mean that was probably the most elegantly and sensually delivered the name of this podcast has ever been. There in the beginning. And then what a great summary. I mean, that's a cliffhanger pointing backwards. Everybody, if you haven't watched the previous or listened to the previous conversation, go do that and then come back and this will be richer and vice versa. And you can also just stay here. It's fine too. Um, but we also talked
Choice
about
and
like
agency. We talked a lot about that.
agency.
Choice, agency, and sovereignty.
Agency and sovereignty. You have absolute permission here to pause, to fast forward, to rewind, or to go to the other podcast. We've created a little container for our listeners. How cute and delightful. So then there was like secure attachment and having that occur in the context of co-regulation and with the divine and beginning to gesture towards the path of waking, what I would call waking down through the body into embodied intuitive awareness and sensitivity. And that's where the rubber ultimately meets the road in being trauma informed is being able to sense who is available to receive you to what degree with what manner of consent and what is it's interesting. I was on a date earlier this week. There's a event I'll talk about where this woman, she's very well trained, she's trauma informed, and I was sharing my journey in the midst of a poem written about her, appreciating her. And in the middle of that journey, like it's like watching Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back and then leaving without seeing Return of the Jedi. It's, it's like, and I tried to convey her this, but she kind of got triggered by me sharing my journey in the middle to landing at a empowering context of how much I appreciate her, in what way, despite whatever insecurities or triggers came up for me. And that led to this whole conversation of, hey, I didn't consent to hearing your process. And that's a male privilege thing to
Mm,
actually be assuming that I want to hear that. And I'm trained mess to message. I'm trained pain to power. I'm trained so long as there's a victory over the past and an empowered context created at the end, I can talk about me being suicidally depressed or me, you know, engaging in self-harm 15 years ago or whatever else.
mm,
And that arc, that journey, if continued to its conclusion, is built to support and empower and uplift and inspire the listener to both open their heart and to see that they, no matter where they're at, they can get somewhere else. And yet, in the moment, I was like, oh shit. I apparently there are layers and levels and opportunities for consent and permission inquiry that depend entirely on energetic, emotional, sensitivity.
mhm,
And so I was like, hey, I'm sorry, that was not my intention to inflict an experience of my process upon you, and I shall endeavor to sensitize myself further.
mm.
And and the other thing is it's like all nonverbal. It's all embodied at its best.
Yeah.
So the journey of that, depending on how much trauma someone has, and everyone's got trauma,
Yeah.
be enormous.
Can we just create that as the container of this whole conversation, that everyone has trauma and we've all been through a global trauma together at this point?
Several.
I want to also bring up this is directly applicable to one of the things that we debriefed on after our last podcast, because my practice is to give a little buffer or a disclaimer before I drop a trauma telegram, is what we call it in the trainings that I do. Is like,
Huh.
I'm not going to drop a trauma telegram. I'm not going to tell you something that's like level 10 out of 10 intense casually as if it's just a regular part of our conversation. I'm going to give you a minute. I'm going to give you a warning that this is coming so that this isn't startling or jarring to the conversation. And that's a very, I think that's something that women have evolved in women's circles and in listening to one another and really um, learning the nuances of what trauma dumping versus authenticity looks like, and
Hmm.
yeah, having to really learn the nuances of when we're in a room with people who have likely all experienced something super intense. How do we not dysregulate the entire room together?
Hmm.
Um, and some of that is giving a little disclaimer. Like, I'd like to mention a couple of my personal examples that do refer to my own traumas.
Hmm.
Um, and I think this is something that feels very, so like broadly socially true about men and women. And I'm always cautious when I make these binary statements like this, but I think social conditioning often is um, men have been taught to be desensitized. And so saying kind of a punchy statement about something traumatic is like, oof, there's a little bit of like, there's emotional response there. It feels good.
Interesting.
Whereas I think women have been trained by the environment, by the safety or lack thereof, the environment, to be very sensitive and to become hypersensitive even. And so when there's like a big punchy statement about a traumatic event, or we're dropping a part of our process right there in conversation without warning or consent or anything, it's like my all of my antenna are out right now, and all of those antenna are like, whew, shrink. Whoa, that was big, that was intense.
Hmm.
I haven't been desensitized to the point where I can kind of be like smacked by something big and intense conversationally without it affecting me.
So it's intriguing, right? Because women have biologically a thicker corpus callosum, integration between right and left hemispheres, better processing of facial expression, tone of voice, body language, a nervous system designed, whether by God or evolution, for ensuring capacity to process and serve children. And so that, and then, and then they
Community.
get socialized better, deeper, stronger earlier than men because it's the biological onus is on men to approach women, just as mammals.
Mm.
So women are constantly fielding and developing a more sophisticated, subtle social calibration, perception, empathic capacity, and probably the capacity for deep limbic resonance because that's also there. Like I feel what my child feels.
Yeah.
And I feel it from the other room. I feel it energetically from my mom still feels me.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like on a nonverbal, non like linear kind of level.
Empty
So
nest syndrome is a much different thing when you consider the fact that moms are still feeling their children and they're just completely outside of their realm of control once they leave the house.
yeah, I knew you'd have wisdom to give as a mother. I appreciate it. So it's interesting because I'm stacking the they're not stacking the deck, but building a context. Men generally are trained to bear up and to be strong in the face of pain and to not to assume that there is no empathy coming at us and that there's no one coming. There's no one we can rely on and that we need to survive and then somehow serve, give, support, listen to, and then ideally be the grounding rod for the feminine. We are the contain our nervous system and its regulation is and can be the container for the feminine. So like it's such a topsy-turvy world where women have all this sensitivity biologically, neurologically, and then men have generally had to stuff it, tune it down, turn it off, don't feel in public, don't cry, don't because it's their job, again, biologically, to protect, defend, and contain. So it's not just a deal with trauma, it's like an active, intentional resensitization process, contravening cultural programming and domestication that a man has to walk. And even then, him crying at Odo showing his love for Garrick on Star Trek as someone I know might do, or you know,
I
even then
think of
there
all the
could be
Lord of
the
the Rings examples.
oh great, I'm not the only one.
Oh
Go to
no,
I'm in the room with a
friendship
fellow
between
nerd.
Legolas and Gimli.
I'm in the room with a fellow nerd. It's awesome. I mean,
Okay.
it's not a pejorative for me. It's like a compliment for me. Um, so yeah, there's this like middle period where a man is overpendulated in the direction of toxic masculine.
Hmm.
Just don't cry, don't feel, don't show your weakness, survive somehow. And then this period where new age wimpy spineless men is is the toxic version of allow yourself to feel and feel fully and delve fully into the internal feminine. And then at some point, there's a reconstitution where it's not just overpendulation in one direction to the other, but it's an integration. And I believe it's right and healthy for women to want to be able to rely upon a man, to be able to feel her, to feel himself, and also to not be completely broken at the spine by his high feminine kind of having him do this dance inside himself, like ultimately be grounded. So all of this to say, I'm trying to paint a picture of a journey that
Yeah,
integrates what you're
you
saying
are.
and
You're
gives
painting
people
a
something to
picture.
aspire to, like a future-paced hero that we can reach for. Because I frankly am somewhere in between two and three. One of my poems I said to this woman, I was like, yeah, I'm priest and lover, but warrior and king are still coming online. So, you know,
Yeah,
well, how did that land for you? All of that, going all the way back to the neuroscience and then other stuff, like what's there?
I want to create an even further fixed point and North Star as we're offering a language of possibilities here.
Yes.
Specifically, we're speaking to men. This is your audience. Um, Imagine an even greater reality than just you are the container for a woman's nervous system. And that is that the woman's nervous system feels so safe within yours that she can be what she's truly meant to be in a polarity based relationship here, which is the translator for like all of the beautiful sensitivity that she has, both neurologically, socially developed, all of those things. The beauty of the translation of this is the entire world that I carry that you have had to be desensitized to. And now I'm the translator. Because you can hold my nervous system, now you have the seed of knowledge of what the entire world full of suffering, wisdom, vision, creation, what this actually looks like through a woman's lens. It's not, I think, when you consider, when the conversation is just, I can hold your vulnerability, it's easy to, um, it's easy to develop a paternalistic relationship. It's easy to kind of minimize the strength and the wisdom of the woman because she's vulnerable right now. But if you were to be able to hold her through the vulnerability, be able to be the strong container to hear the total breakdown of like, it's fucking too much to carry. And then you were able to travel with her all the way through that to be like, whoa, this is everything you're carrying. This is a lens on humanity that I've never had the privilege to be able to look through. Thank you.
So on the way to that layer
Mm-hmm.
of loving sensitivity and awareness, and this really like it didn't scare me as much as put me at like real unease in the community that I mentioned last time that I'm now investigating, maybe coming back to because that current of energy helps me maintain a certain level of character that I'm committed to. And I believe I can use it for that, even if staying cagely at arm's length with elements and people who may be dysfunctional. Long story short, in the community, initially there was this asymmetrical promise made on the part of men to be willing to receive the perceived insanity of women.
Mm.
Oh, she has a trigger. Oh, she has a reaction. There's some truth. There's some core kernel of gold to listen for inside of that. If you can put yourself aside and listen for where she's coming from, part of her job is to perceive with more sensitivity things about you or about the world than you are able to at this point. And even if it's laced with vicious, aggressive attack and judgment that is felt like a knife to the nervous system, like still back off and receive it. Sit the fuck down, shut up and listen. Even if it hurts, even if it completely dysregulates you and takes you out to where you're now like, ow. And I think there probably is to some degree because of whatever patriarchal systems, a repressed amount of insanity or a repressed, what we would perceive and label as insanity, but it's really just buzzy butterfly-like trauma writhing on the part of the feminine psyche. And maybe even Kali. Like maybe there's just this archetype of ideally constructive destruction. And so for me, receiving that so many times and then receiving that outside, that was another thing. Like this text message exchange where I was kind of told you have to have this orthodoxy around what happened to this guy. And uh, I was like, I wasn't supported. I was not held in the pain that was provoked in me while it was my job to hold the pain that was provoked in another about me, like directed towards me.
Mhm.
So in the co-creation of us lifting the table, which I've used several times in the past week, thank you, you're a very skilled facilitator with elegant distinctions. Um, in the interest of that, the main reason that I'm curious about re-entering the community is that asymmetry of men have to hold the space. And if
Mhm.
she comes up with judgment and attack, shut the fuck up, sit the fuck down and receive because she's more sensitive and she knows better than you. Now there's a commitment, I believe, I didn't go into it deeply, on the part of women to be love as much as possible. Because that's lifting the other side of the table. That's not,
Mhm.
hey, you've got a blank check to be an asshole, and I just have to grin and bear it. I mean, I'm launching a funnel to serve men in relationships in marriages who've been treated like crap by their wives.
Mhm.
And how do they begin to repave a path to where they can receive and dance like Aikido, like martial arts? Like, all right, I'm going to take that energy. I'm not going to resist it, but I am going to include it in a co-creation of something deeper, richer, better.
Mhm.
So, like, what do you hear in that? And how do we polish this posture for men and women in an image that leaves both parties safe and heard and felt and seen? So that trauma is not re-triggered by the man holding space for the woman and vice versa. Yeah.
I want to I want to zoom all the way out and kind of show you what my paradigm looks like, but I also want to say really fast that I think it's always important that when we're holding space, we know when we can no longer hold space and that we communicate the boundaries of our consent, the borders of our consent. So I've been in a lot of social justice circles that can be very binary and very overly simplistic sometimes in their passion.
Mhm.
Passion sometimes doesn't leave room for nuance, and um, things that I fully believe in, like, if you've experienced privilege, then you should be able to hold space for the marginalized voices. I believe that, yes.
Mm.
And, I've also had the experience of holding space for um, someone who's experienced so many intersections of marginalization and social, medical, social systems oppression,
Mm.
and been blasted and been like, hey, actually my dad just died. I'm not the person to be holding space for this right now. I As much as I believe people with white privilege and people with social privileges, people who haven't been through this type of oppression should be able to hold space for the voices of others. There's a time and a place still, and so is is the goal solution oriented? Are we actually trying to create a whole and holistic win-win?
Mm.
Are we working toward mutuality here? If that's the case, then someone who's just been through a trauma, sounds like in your community you had just been through a trauma of having someone close to you pass. I had just had somebody close to me pass away. This is something that totally shakes the existential system. It totally shakes the nervous system. It messes with the brain. It literally messes with the brain. The brain is not very good at figuring out how somebody can be here and then not be here.
Mm.
So, is that the best person to be holding space for big, big attack energy? No.
Mm.
Uh, is this person maybe in a year from now, after they've completed a little bit more of their grief cycle, is that the best person to be able to hold space? Maybe, actually, yeah. But there's a time and place. And I think knowing in our system when we need to pause and when we need to step back is actually one of the things that really is really important for not creating more accidental harm.
There's there's a distinction that I want to play with you that I think you'll appreciate. it's from my training as a business coach, but it's, I think, the answer to at least facilitators sensitizing themselves in the way that you're walking towards. So this ideally would be a map of the brain. There's the creative, intuitive, abstract. We call it dynamo genius. Can fill a blank sheet of paper from nothing with infinitely many great ideas.
Mhm.
And there's like the right hemisphere. I got to remember I'm mirrored here, where it's like people and awareness of social interactions.
Mhm.
And then there's tempo genius, which is fine-grained sensitivity to moment by moment shifts in where someone is at, what they're dealing with, what place they're coming from, what time they're at on their own timeline. And then there's steel genius, which is like structuring it all and numbers and data and linear systematization. So like I think the industry of coaching and transformation is biased in the direction of dynamo genius. You can
Mm.
see it in all the marketing when people say, oh, build a six-figure business in 3 months. Like, okay, you took a subset of testimonials, you built your whole marketing campaign and promise for your program on what they did, not necessarily what everyone does. And we know that, like, not everybody finishes programs. In fact, a lot of people don't, maybe like 50%. So that promise is like a castle hanging in midair for everyone who has not been considered in their uniqueness.
Mhm.
So for the past couple of years, it's been like, how do I consider the uniqueness of the people in front of me and make justifiably reasonable promises about what kinds of progress they can make? And then to zoom out, great language again, um, as a culture in general, being not trauma informed, being that the meme, the idea of privilege has not necessarily yet A, been non-resisted, or B, accepted and integrated for most people. Like, yes, it'd be cool. It's a dynamo genius thing. Like, it'd be cool if someone has possessed any amount of any type or any angle of privilege in the world of intersectionality, that they should, it's difficult for me to say should ever, but that it would be great for them to have a skill and capacity. And they're not necessarily going to be at the same point on a timeline of training that they maybe don't have an awareness that they need to get, or B, have a full embrace of. It took active effort to read Ibram Kendi or whatever his name was, the anti-racist guy. Um, yeah, it took active effort to work through the white supremacy book. It took active effort to watch all these documentaries about the mistreatment of Black and Indigenous and other people around hashtag BLM. I was up for days, not continuously, but just like feeling stuff at the soul level in my nervous system that I had to remediate for just to stay on that path of beginning to sensitize myself. So when it comes to men with women, which is where we're at here, or white people with Black people, whatever, I think and then to tie it back to the example of these people, they weren't paying attention to tempo genius.
Yeah.
They weren't sensitive to where I was at. They didn't know how to be. So just like I would say, oh, I have privilege, so now I should have a certain capacity without any training in it. Ugh. Like I look at them and I have compassion for them now and I say, oh, they're not trauma informed. They're
Mhm.
not grounded in the neuroscience of the reality of what they say and do does to the people around them or what they're dealing with when they're engaging with those people. So anyway, was this a fun trip?
This is a fun trip, and now it's like I want to speak to both something that would be good for facilitators and something that might be good for men is understanding that the pacing and
Mm,
understanding people's window of tolerance and understanding that if you blow out somebody's nervous system, it's going to take a long, long time for them to be able to come back to the truth that you were trying to deliver.
hmm hmm
So better to say, better to be have the self-awareness of saying, I can face this storm in you for 5 minutes. And then hopefully by next week or the week after, I can grow to being able to hold this for 15 minutes. And then hope, and my goal is to keep being able to expand. But every time we both have a success story that feeds that evidence bank of we can look at this together and stay healthy and sane and safe. And I'm going to keep revisiting it. I think that that's also where the safety is that I'm going to keep coming back to try and grow this muscle. But I'm not going to try and start with 200-pound weights. I'm going to start with 5-pound weights, even if it makes me look a certain way in the gym.
That sounds like a personal story that's fun to tell. Oh, that's
I
beautiful.
wanted to zoom out and kind of paint a different picture of the paradigm because I was hearing this story of like how many men have been really mistreated by women in their marriages, and of course I hear so many stories from women, and so we are holding this polarity, um, and I hear the stories of women feeling so disempowered in their relationships. And I think something that's just really important to me and something that I've found helpful is we want people to take accountability. Sometimes in a less healthy state, we want people to know when it's their fault.
Mm-hmm.
And and we have an over individualized framework for how we look at everything because we live in a very lonely society of people who live in their little boxes and don't live in village contexts and don't live with their multi-generational families and don't know the stories of their ancestors and in so many ways just don't know how to have a collective mindset. So if we were to look at accountability through the lens of a collective mindset, it's more like instead of it being someone's fault, which is like someone takes 100% of the pie, it's like we're dividing the pie in all the directions that it needs to go into, like really social structure, social frameworks, family culture, so all the conditioning takes a big part of the pie and why something has happened the way it's happened. And then our adverse childhood experiences, things that we were not in control of, are dictating some of our reflexes and habits. And so, yeah, that takes some of the pie. And then my choices also take some of the pie, and I will be accountable and responsible for my choices. And if I'm asked to take responsibility for my choices and my reflexes and habits because of my traumas that I was not in control over, and the social conditioning that brought both of us into this fucked up conversation in the first place,
Yeah.
then that's just overwhelming. I can't carry all of that. I cannot carry, none of us can carry, he can't carry what hundreds of thousands of people collectively co created. It's too much to ask somebody to be 100% accountable for that. Um, and it's not solution focused either. It doesn't give us the thing that we really need, which is somebody to be able to speak to their choices and how they're going to keep us more safe the next time they make choices.
I love that. Because it's not an absurd, cruel, uncarryable demand implied by a should for a capacity that needs to have already existed in someone who might just be beginning to grok the nature of that capacity's value. It's an elegant invitation into sensitization with the charitable assumption that the other person being asked and invited is interested in a more compassionate, sensitive world, community, heart, nervous system. And so that's just let's do that. That's great.
I think something that I want to revisit and something I think we've even put in our like maybe we could get to this topic
Maybe.
is the part of the pie that the collective carries, and that is men have been conditioned to be the over power over dynamic, and women have been conditioned to try desperately to get that power back somehow. It creates a domination and reaction response that again is not, it's reflexive, it's habitual to so many people until they actually step back and see it. It's like I was bitchy because I was being dominated in a way that I know is not okay. And you didn't deserve my bitchiness because you learned to dominate in this way and you didn't even know it was happening. Like there it gets messy until we put the responsibility where responsibility lies, which is a social structure that doesn't suit any of us, that we've seen when it fractals out, that it gets real violent real fast, and really just separates us so far that everybody ends up feeling unseen, unheard, not understood, and just leaves us all like little kids that are just like, but where's the comfort? Where's the safety now? And so if it was if it wasn't me against you and your misogyny, if it wasn't you and me against me and my misandry, if it wasn't, fuck all men or like women are so abusive, or if it wasn't those conversations, if it was us against social conditioning that has really torn us apart, then I think that we could do a lot more.
There's so much. We got to rise home again. Just calling it. Uh, all directions. I mean, I was thinking earlier, a body in motion left to itself will continue in motion unless acted upon by an external force. It's a law of motion, I guess. It's Isaac Newton, whatever, but in physics. And so for someone with privilege, any kind, male privilege, whatever, their exercise of power will be untrammeled and uninterrupted until and unless someone, frankly, finds a way to influence them to see that uh, an adjustment, a pivot into the direction of greater sensitization is actually in their interest.
Yeah.
So while absolute power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and arguably this means that people are behaving in a quote unquote corrupt way, like harming without awareness and without even intention. Uh, I see that the first step in that direction is if there's an awareness of domestication and programming,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's an abstraction of that domestication and programming enough in a safe space where a man, a white man, a heterosexual white man can start to look at, okay, I've been programmed in certain ways. The programming is not me, but I may have perceived it to be for as long as I have been. And now I get to disjoin those. And this is some of the work that was done in the white supremacy book. White Supremacy and Me. What a cute title. I mean, this is like a really playful, hey, I'm here to help. Don't be scared. Don't, what was that? The there's something where white people just can't even talk about the thing. And so they push it away. Um,
Fragility.
right, fragility. Yeah, I read a part of the book on that too. So this is like male fragility, and there's like, I mean, we haven't even started about financial privilege. I can't wait to get to that part of intersectionality because that is a real thing. It is an absolutely real thing. Just look at how many women Elon Musk has impregnated. I mean, it's like, but anyway, the abstraction of it, then we can start assigning responsibility appropriately to the thing that has happened to us, that has been living in us rather than to us ourselves, in exactly the way that you were talking about, like, I'm being bitchy because you've repressed me. And there needs to be a space for that. That like arguably Me Too as a movement was an eruption of the resentment, the frustration on the part of the collective female psyche with specific, you know, pointing to people so that the reclaiming of consent and agency and visibility and sensitivity could
Yeah.
begin. I don't think it was enough. I think it became kind of weaponized. I think it became um, overpendulated in a certain judgmental, cancel the villain kind of way, which then ends the conversation. But yeah, I see that as a token of what you're pointing to, and I'm curious where we could go next as a culture. So yeah.
I mean, as a culture, we're going to go in all the directions at once.
Every culture is a rhizome, huh? Okay.
It just is, it's the mycelial nature of humanity. But it's like, where do you want to be on that journey? Where do you want to position yourself, and where's the best place to position oneself um, that creates the most good? Man, I'm trying to focus because there were a few details of what you just said that I wanted to jump on. Um, but I think this question of where can we go next, it makes sense here. So far we've been talking about how to be trauma informed in the dating sphere. We've talked about how to be trauma informed as you're approaching choosing, how to have those first interactions from that place. And now I think it's like, once you're in relationship, how are we rebalancing the social structure within the kind of small microbiome of the relationship, of the connection? And of course it's going to be so subjective because it's going to depend on everybody's nervous system capacity. It's going to depend on everybody's trauma history and what they're capable of perceiving or not perceiving because of their trauma history, what superpowers they're bringing to the table that they're aware of. um, so I think really ultimately the best thing, because it is so subjective, the next best step is awareness. It's that um, I'm really into rewilding. Actually, we talked about like the very civilized framework, and I think of us as like people who've consented to live in zoos.
Yes.
So very, very cut off from how humans are nature and how humans interact as nature. And so I think the best thing we can do is like plant our bare feet on the earth. There you go. Plant our bare feet on the earth, get into our animal bodies, and learn how to listen to our systems. And when they're telling us what my capacity is, what my capacity is not, when I'm running into a sense of danger, like, can you feel your brain? Because I've done I've done so much work with the somatic mind body that I can tell what part of my brain my circulation is hitting right now. Like there's a big flush of circulation energy to this part of my brain, and I know when a conversation is no longer something that I can say yes to and create any amount of good. So and if the other person that's there has not learned how to be in their animal body and feel that, then they're like, oh, you're just being avoidant. You're not willing to be accountable. you're you're cutting me off. But if both animal bodies, when you're in your animal body and the other person hits their limit, you also feel that. You naturally, in your own animal body, you like pull back a little bit because you're like, the next step is fighting. is war, and we don't want to go there because we were trying to create safety. So once we've once we've started once the hackles are starting to rise, once the edges are starting to fray, we're pausing because both of us feel that.
God built the body and built the body with features and benefits for good reasons. And like, because in the past, right, especially as I've been it's actually not rewilding. It's the opposite. I've been resensitizing myself to the value in the memeplex of Christianity.
Mm.
It's like arguably a packaging for wisdom, ideally based on direct experience and oriented towards let us be loving to one another at a base level, hopefully, ideally. We had some crusades and some inquisitions and wars, but at the bottom, before all that, like I've been resensitizing myself to this. And in the midst of that, there's this Pauline idea of the flesh and the spirit, which sounds really averse to the flesh, but maybe the flesh is the spirit. And maybe there is only an aspect of the spirit embodied in flesh that takes us astray. Because I think that criticism is still useful, that we have an ego, and the ego, uh, in the Tool song, we draw lines and we cut the world right in two, and now this is mine and this is yours, and we're not together, we're not the same. Like I do think that being in Christ through a direct mystical experience of the perception of we're one, we're all one. That was the ideal for Paul. I think, I hope. That's my interpretation. It allows me to sleep at night. Um, so yeah, I'm so charmed by this idea that even an attachment style, even a fight or flight response, even a this is too heavy for me right now, based on embodied intuition, could be God speaking. Is that how you hold that? Did I just make some of that up or?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think of it. I do think of Christianity as being something that's really far away from its roots. Um, because Christianity was never supposed to be empire, but it became empire. Christianity was, at its roots, it was a circle of a few people in a living room talking about these greater truths. And I think when you have set and setting is so important, when you have those small groups and you have that ability to authentically communicate together and really look together at a truth instead of having a man at a pulpit delivering a message to hundreds, and it's very unilateral and it reinforces this power dynamic that we just talked about that doesn't work for any of us, where it's power over
Mm. Yeah.
um, yeah, I think coming back to the vessel as a sacred messenger system. I
Mm.
think of the body as being the oldest. I mean, it's the older part. It's the older perception system. Our prefrontal cortex evolved very, very recently.
Yeah, even the neurons in the heart and the gut are older than the brain. Yeah.
Exactly. There's more neurons that go from the heart to the brain than there are from the brain to the heart. It's a beautiful system when you look at how much the heart, the liver, the gut are perceiving the world around us and then sending messages up to the brain. And when I think of that, I guide people in our sessions often of like thinking of that as the grandmother, like the older, wiser message that
Mm.
speaks more slowly, more subtly. And then the brain as being kind of this like young, bossy teenager that likes to take a lot of attention.
And to talk a lot and not set up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the more all of us can move into that wiser, slower paced, more nuanced part of ourselves, the easier all of these conversations become and the easier it is to face the traumas face the social conditionings, face the social justice conversations,
Mm.
just how to move into all of these places where there's if there's enough frenetic energy and there's enough wounds in the room, somebody's going to be harmed.
Mm.
Um, yeah, let's move away from that.
There's so much you pointed to. I want to go back. You suggested or implied that the village, like being in community, was the primary context for the development of our nervous system, which also implies that that's the best context for, like by implication, our co-regulation and healing. Am I hearing that right as like an ideal to orient towards?
That is one of my ideals. That's one of I've had the experience of having that. I've had the experience of not having that. And I know the difference is drastic.
So in this world, urban Austin,
Mm-hmm,
where we live in small metal boxes,
mm-hmm.
either freestanding or entangled with a bunch of other metal boxes in a larger metal box.
Yeah.
Um, how do you create that experience of that kind of community? Because it must be a distributed thing. It must be a nodes on a network that with spokes out from you that, or maybe it's also rhizomatic. It's my favorite concept from Deleuze and Guattari. Their capitalism and schizophrenia is this rhizome thing, and I'm just playing with it these days, so it's everywhere I see it. But yeah, how do you create that experience of that village so that you can be held and safely embark on paths like the deconstruction of privilege inside yourself or the healing of trauma?
Mm. I think I have to offer that this you're asking someone who's been through a big uh, period of loss and social trauma in the last 2 years. So I can answer that question from what I know to be true when things were going well. I
Uh-huh.
can answer that question from what I know to be true when I don't have any of the things and I'm on the outside looking in at what would have been really nice. Um, but yeah, to be fully honest, the things that I've experienced, the losses and adversities and conflicts that I've experienced in the last 2 years have me still in that question of like, not just how do you create that when you're in a position of high amount of resource, high amount of capacity, high amount of privilege, but um, how do we create that as people when there's such a variety of people who are at different points again in that Maslow's hierarchy.
Mm.
I think we can't expect people. I mean, Maslow's hierarchy really lays it out, like the people who are still struggling with housing, with food insecurity, with basic needs being met, and people who are still struggling with safety,
Mm.
and people who are still struggling with losses, such as that I've incurred in the last couple of years. Those three levels of the triangle are hit, and so those aren't the people that create the communities. The people that create the communities are the ones that have those three levels covered
Mm.
and are able to kind of exist in the next levels. They have they have the social safety, and so they can create more social safety. I think it takes a very, it's the trauma of the gifted child. Every once in a while you have somebody with trauma that can just like burst like a phoenix from the ashes, like I've created this thing even from my place of woundedness. And um, you know in some ways I can be that person, and it's a beautiful thing. But I think in general we need to take more responsibility for one another, and all of us are vulnerable. Something I've experienced is, as someone who's struggled in some of these bottom rungs of the triangle and also held space for others, is that, I'll hear somebody who has all the bases covered that I do not, and I'll hear them struggling, and I'll feel that for them. Like, your suffering feels like my suffering. It feels just as important and intense and devastating. Um, and so in some ways, like, there's no comparison of people's suffering, and yet I think it's very important to be able to zoom out of our our individual context and our blinders and say, where does my suffering fit in the world? I think this is an important conversation right now as we are experiencing global turmoil on a greater scale than we have been uh, for many years. um, where does my suffering fit in this larger context of a world that's also suffering? I can I could tell my story, and it would be sad and hard, but also it's not the story of someone living in Libya. It's not the story of someone living in Palestine, and it's not the story of somebody who's in Iran right now. And I think the more we integrate that collective view, the more we can put ourselves in context and say, yes, I have this amount of suffering, but I also have this amount of resourcing to be able to give and create and co-create. And then I'm actually more removed from my suffering than I've ever been, and I have more resourcing than I realized. I hadn't put myself in context yet. I was so bothered by that thing that happened in that conversation yesterday that I forgot that I'm not actually suffering anymore, and I have high amounts of resource to be able to co-create something beautiful and to reach out to that other person that I know is struggling right now, or to reach out to someone who I know has family in Tehran right now, or to reach out to whatever it is to reach. Like, do I have the energy? Do I have the ability to reach in that mycelial way? Like, I get to be the connecting point right now.
There's this image of Indra's net in Hindu philosophy and mysticism that each of us are spherical mirrors reflecting each other and at the same time also reflecting the whole, which is a network of infinitely many spherical mirrors. And for me, it was really redeeming. I was in depression in college when I discovered it, and I was like, oh, I can't help but be meaningful to the entirety of the human race as I am, however I am right now here. And the activation of that awareness does cue up a capacity, however limited that capacity might be. And yeah, what I'm hearing is we have the opportunity of a cosmopolitan responsibility in awareness, like responsibility, an ability to respond as an invitation, not a demand, to know what's going on in the world, assuming a certain level of safety and security and basic needs met. And I was just thinking about that. Like, it would be arrogance to assume that someone who is homeless should prioritize doing the work of deconstructing and deprogramming privilege. It would be absurd too. You need to be doing this work because you're bad and wrong because you're a white man on the street homeless. Like, oh, okay. So there's like a calibration to the level of capacity currently available. And then there's an activation of that capacity as a node in the network of contribution. And yeah, there was something else you pointed to that I really love, which is um, assuming charity. Once you're in that conversation, once you're in that relationship, we train others in how to treat us, and we are sources of new programming, incidentally. If we're rewriting the blueprint, we're rewriting the script. We train others in how to treat themselves by how we treat ourselves. Leaders go first, and the assumption of leadership on our part, leadership into awareness of what's going on in Iran, or relationship patterns, or trauma patterns, or privilege patterns. Like it's on us to then be a standing wave of transformation, to communicate that awareness, to distribute that awareness, to activate our node in Indra's net in the mycelial network. And for me, it was really refreshing because what you did was you threw all of the work that I do into this new context of like, oh, that's what this is for, not just to help men um, have better connections with their wives and more sex with their partners. Like, no, it's like if we could get to the root of the root of the root of what it looks like to be fully independent rather than codependent with culture or parents or privilege or whatever, then we have a fighting shot at aiming at the heaven of interdependence. And that village that was the spark to this whole tangent. The village that then, you have somebody walk in with trauma into a nurturing context of a bunch of open female and male nervous systems. That's going to go faster and go easier if they're actually safe with those people. And those people are interested in building a culture with more possibility than them being out on their own, bouncing around through social systems like the ones you were suggesting can be problematic earlier.
Mhm.
Oh.
And if we have this context of interdependence, then someone with trauma comes into a space with people who have grounded, healthy nervous systems. And there's not immediately an us versus them, there's an us. Like, hey, look, there's one of us that's been through some of the things that some of us go through. And they're at a different point, and we have the beautiful privilege of being able to be with them at that point in the journey and to relearn, like, oh yeah, that's what it was. I forgot what it was like when I was deep in my suffering. Thank you for reminding me what things matter when you're at that point and what things don't matter when you're at that point. I think being this goes back to like the the beauty of being with someone who has a trauma history, the beauty of being with someone through their trauma healing process is that it reminds you of the basics that always need to be revisited, what humans need at the very foundation. And we can get really far removed when we're up in our self-actualization conversations and we're all up in the esoteric and we are all, like in our beliefs create our reality kind of like elevated conversations when we're really, really far away from what does it look like to really have to be concerned about a child? What does it look like to have to be concerned about a parent? What does it look like to be in these crisis moments? And I there's an amount of actually living. I think that less people would be experiencing existential depression up in those higher realms of self-actualization conversations if they were in touch with the people who were still down there on the bottom levels of like housing, food, you chop wood, you carry water,
Yep.
you take care of the children, you take care of the most vulnerable people. At that level, life is harder, but it's simpler. And I think we won't get as lost as kind of philosophical self-growth evolution minded people if we are in touch with more diversity of needs and more diversity of experiences to be able to really like stay with the grit of life.
Yep. Yep. That's great. Because I'm going to propose a minor mini like micro cliffhanger in a second, for the sake of self-care. Uh, just pacing that. And on the way there, there's this like if somebody's developed enough in the world of growth and personal development, they've gotten to this point of life is a wishbone. Anything you want wants you. You can have, be, and do anything. The law of attraction is in operation. Everything is working in your favor. Yes, and everything and everyone in life is not merely your wishbone. And it's
Yeah.
like there's a self-centering that is better than a de-centered, trauma, domesticated, programmed hopelessness, but it's not quite what we need to land in. It's like a middle stage.
Yeah.
Because for humanity, we need to land in a place where we can perceive and receive, as you were saying, the viscerally embodied experience of other people's needs, the grit and the grime of life. And yeah, it's a tricky thing, that spiritual journey, because like, well, I came up with this idea of guerrilla empathy, and good to know my commitment of centering more deeply a sensitive awareness of the community's needs came at the right moment. So gorilla, go ahead. You had something?
Oh no, it was, that was a great example of like, my body has needs right now. Like, same, because it's lunchtime.
It is indeed.
At midday time. Yeah. Thank you for listening to your body so that we can have a pause and we can both take care.
You're welcome. You're welcome, and thank you. The liquid nutrition, that's what it does. So gorilla empathy. We now this is a joke. This is a total joke because it would land us in the complete opposite of what we're ultimately trying to achieve. But something not unlike this could actually, I think, eventually support people. It's like we kidnap, so that's the first issue, but you know, fine. We kidnap the top 100 billionaires on the planet, a Clockwork Orange style. We tie them to the chair, we tape their eyes open and get them to go through the landmark for them, where they're feeling and hearing other people who are not them at different layers and levels of privilege and experience and awareness, share their trauma, and then their heart will inevitably open. Or they will double down on their own assholery and selfishness. It could go either way, but something like that, where we could transplant people from different layers and levels of society into situations and events and experiences where it's like, oh, the purpose of this is for me to feel you and to feel me more deeply through feeling you and to open me more deeply through hearing you. At which point, oh, suddenly I'm empathizing. Suddenly I'm present to you as part of me in a way that maybe wouldn't have been possible, available, or likely previously because I was just autopilot trying to survive, trying to meet those security, safety needs. Um, what do you think of my proposal?
I actually had a very similar proposal. I've spoken to a lot of women about wanting a predator dungeon.
Fascinating.
And it's not the billionaires, it's like,
The
it's the
sexual
people in our
predators.
community that have been sexual predators, and I just want to have a dungeon where I
Boy,
kidnap and
that
they
was
are forced to
that was a complete sentence
EMDR
to
and
stop.
therapy.
I just want to have a dungeon, period. That's what I heard.
Of course.
Then we'll use it in this particular way. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm playing.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting parallel desire here to like force people to experience empathy.
Yeah.
But where we're at in this conversation is inviting more people to experience empathy. And I think something that's really important for all of us to be understanding right now is that our algorithms do not encourage empathy for people that are not like us unless we actually actively teach our algorithms to show us those things. And I think I say that because most people are highly conditioned right now for hours a day by their algorithms. And it's actually becoming a quite dangerous thing. It's part of gender-based violence being on the rise right now, and the statistics are that it is on the rise. When a male age 16 to 25 logs onto social media, creates a platform for themselves, within minutes it's populated by highly misogynistic content and even violent content if somebody pays any attention to any of those first several memes, reels, whatever. So unless we're actively pursuing voices that are not like ours and willing to kind of feel the rub of like, ooh, I don't like the way that person delivers their message. I think that this, like if we're willing to experience the rub of our own judgments and sit with them long enough to be like, oh, I was judgmental of that person because of my conditioning about body shame or because of my conditioning about classist, like how shame exists within classist systems. And um, we, it takes active and uncomfortable building of what is socially conditioning us right now.
Hmm. It strikes me that even with ChatGPT, there's a hyperactivation of echo chamber
Mhm.
kind of thinking. This it's like a logarithmically, even arguably more intense reflection back and reinforcement of certain biases and limitations in capacity for empathy.
I have I've gotten used to I don't use Chat GPT for this very often, but sometimes I'll want a neutral assessment of something like a conversation that has happened or something like that. And I'll put it through and be like, point out these things, point out the conversational style, point out some of these things that might be happening. And then I always follow up with given given AI's impulse to fawn to the user, what would you have said to the other person in this conversation?
Hmm.
And I think that things like that are important to know the technology that we're working with, to know how it does create echo chambers,
Hmm.
how it reinforces our own biases over and over, and like really entrenches us in those, and how to combat that, I think is really important.
That was a brilliant, like tactical slingshot through the fawning into empathy with ChatGPT. Because if you ask it to include the other user, so to speak, then you can bend it back in the direction of basically fawning in their direct. I mean, it's not actively asking it to fawn again, but it's always inevitably going to do that to some degree. So now that it's including them, somewhere between those two overpendulations, you'll find something that is useful.
Right.
So there's a whole resensitization and retraining program probably that could be created for people to combat the bias and echo chamber. Because we've started with the ideal, which
Mhm.
for me is like there's a soul level reclaiming of sovereignty and compassion. We're not here to feel happy, my buddy John says. We're here to feel fully. And once we feel fully, then we get to feel happier than we've ever felt. And how I'm hearing that cash out here is I take responsibility for my trauma, the stuff I've packed and stacked, the stuff in my blind spots that I haven't seen. Then it opens my heart to the possibility of feeling fully those around me as an embodied, attuned, calibrated nervous system, at which point compassion, one would imagine, and this seems to be the end of mystical experience too, will naturally arise because we're all one anyway, and limbic resonance was our birthright before the domestication, the programming, the trauma. And so, yeah, I guess I was going to ask the question of where do we start in resensitizing ourselves, but it seems to be feel us fully, thoroughly, and then at a certain critical threshold, we'll have felt us enough to no longer be a danger to others from unconsciousness and lack of awareness and ignorance and
Mhm.
trauma reactivity and hijack. Do you have an ideal for what that path looks like or landmarks on that path?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Back to the body first,
Uh-huh.
um, putting ourselves in context into an interdependent system. And then I think it goes back and forth for a while there.
Huh, yeah.
Yeah. Um, then we go back to our body and we're like, oh, I don't know about that feeling. And then we go back out and we're like, okay, and where does that fit within the context of this conversation? And we start Um, rather, I'm describing this not as a linear journey, but kind of as a mycelial journey, because then we ask the person over here for a little bit more context, and then we come back and we like let that settle and integrate into our body and into our system, and let our bodies speak to us about the things that have been blind spots and the ways that we have been desensitized to our own self-awareness and awareness of our place in the system. And then from there we go out to this other person, get a little bit more context, and then we come back in and integrate that. And then so it's like, instead of this linear path, it is it is like a mycelial fractal experience of like reaching out in different directions to be like, this is a place where, because I've assessed now enough that I know I'm missing information,
Hmm.
I'm going to go in that direction and ask somebody else to give me more context. And I think this directly applies to dating in a world that has experienced trauma, with people who have trauma history, is that once we integrate and we come back and we're like, okay, this is my self-awareness of what went down and why that went down that the way it did. And now I'm realizing that there's this whole gap. Like, my brain is no longer trying to reinforce to me that I'm right. My brain is now trying to reinforce to me that I'm safe and that I fit within a larger system.
Yeah, there's the necessity for the generating of a secure base and a safe haven to return to as one delves into this deconstruction, trauma healing, resensitization process. That's what I'm hearing. Hence community, or at least a practitioner to start.
Yeah, sometimes when community feels unsafe, you need a professional to give you, to model what a healthy, safe relationship looks like.
So you mentioned something else earlier that I really loved, this idea of a window of tolerance.
Mhm.
How can we cultivate an awareness of where that is for our person, for dating or relating, and then also for ourselves? Like my historical assumption is that if anybody gets triggered in front of me, that's them, and that's for them to get responsible for. And I think it's useful on my side, if anybody triggers me, that it's first and above all priority my responsibility to do the digging and the work to feel fully what's in there rather than trying at the beginning to control or dictate to them a change in behavior or like, hey, you need to work harder to be more safe. Because I might still be coming in judgment from that communication, judgment, hijack, reaction. If I'm unsafe, trying to chess master someone to make me feel more safe through sensitize yourself to the fact that you're a neurotypical. You didn't grow up with Asperger's like I did. Like, that's not even going to get heard.
Mm,
I'm using it as a weaponized, like, energetic attack through judgment on them for not having that awareness, you know?
yeah. I think one of the things that affects these conversations is power dynamics. I
Yes.
don't think we've really covered that enough,
Let's do it.
because when somebody who has more power in the conversation is feeling under attack versus the person who has less power in the conversation feeling under attack, those are different experiences.
Mhm.
um, and there's a different, very reasonable response to that, like a porcupine kind of like shoving off its quills. um, the way I the way I assess power dynamics in a situation is who has access to more choices,
Mm.
who has access to more comfort, and who has more access to more backup in a situation. So, that's why if we're in a medical provider's office, the doctor is just, it's a Tuesday for them versus this is like a very scary procedure for you. And so they have a power dynamic both because they are going to have backup with anybody that they call into the office. They have security there, they have whatever. They're more comfortable in the environment because this is just their another day at work. And they have more access to choices. They have all of this education, so they have all of this information, and they have all these different places that they can go, more possibilities.
Hmm.
You're sitting there with less possible. You don't have any idea what's going to happen next. I don't know what the possibilities are. I don't know what questions I could ask. I don't know how I could advocate for myself. I don't know if I'll get any backup at all if I speak up.
Hmm.
So that's just like it's a totally different context, but it makes it simpler to see how this can affect a conversation and the safety in a conversation when it's between two people who've decided to be in a relationship. It's different. There's so many layers of like my personal power versus my power in the world, like the power in the role that I play in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Is I can be personally, I can be somebody who carries a lot of confidence, a lot of self love, a lot of healing, a grounded nervous system. And that puts me into a place of personal power. And yet, if you have financial dominance, if you have a place of prominence in a community, if you have, if you've grown up with everybody rewarding you for dominating a situation, even if you're not conscious of that, if you've grown up with people rewarding you for desensitizing and just taking lead and making unilateral choices, if you've grown up with certain cultural privileges that just give you a feedback loop of you're normal in the environment and everybody else is other.
Hmm.
All of these things are layers of power and privilege that affect a conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of in polyamory and open relating, they say go the speed and intensity of the slowest person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Like default to the needs of the person who, I mean, if there was if I was going to have a threesome, right? One of those people does not have the experience or awareness or trauma informed and they're uncomfortable. Like, okay, well, we slow down or we stop or we don't do the thing at all. And so I hear a potential for inclusiveness via the window of tolerance into these various realms and how that's set against the backdrop of power dynamics and how it can become a little cagey because those with power do not, it's not necessary for them. Well, we all have power, but there's the varying levels of power circumstantially you just pointed to. Um, those with power don't have to admit the validity or the value or the necessity of acknowledging someone below them's window of tolerance. Um, and so then it becomes about advocacy, then it becomes about claiming your space.
Yeah. So I think the important thing here is to pause and assess when we're feeling under attack, to pause and assess, was it this person's social evolutionary obligation
How generous.
to send those quills at me because I was clamping down in a way that I didn't know?
That's
Was I overpowering this person in a way that I didn't know? And was it their biological prerogative to be like, fuck off, you cannot, right?
Are you talking the top to the bottom?
I'm talking about when you are the person in the up power position and you're
Yeah.
feeling attacked, to pause and assess in what ways does power and power dynamics affect this conversation and affect the way this person might have been advocating, the way I might have been listening, or vice versa. If I'm advocating and they're listening, and yet we're actually creating an even more unbalanced social system in the micro to the macro,
Yeah.
is it their obligation? I believe it actually is. I believe that it is the obligation. It can it can be trained to be much more graceful and much more skilled. But I do believe that there's like a biological prerogative of the person who's down power to tell the person who's up power, back the fuck off.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think before we start claiming that we are the one that is victimized, or before we start claiming that we are the one that's under attack, to really, to again zoom out and see this conversation in the context of greater systems.
Yeah, so in the moment, short-circuiting the intensity of the personal reaction to them as a person through awareness of the context
Mm-hmm.
and the differential in that context. So complicated. I mean, it's an enormous path to become aware of all the subtleties and distinctions. But I think as a species, it's worth pursuing. I think it's worth that process and that progress. Especially you were talking about earlier with Christianity, how set and setting I thought was so brilliant in application to the distribution of pockets of wisdom or enlightenment or, awareness, right? That there are structures of authority, men in white coats or cassocks that deliver information or they come from a certain space, and then we've now fallen on our sword in our face, thinking that they are someone in front of whom we ought to debase. I didn't mean for that to be a poem, but it happened. Um,
Yeah, I think this is, we can expand this so it's not just about Christianity. I did grow up deeply embedded in the Christian religion and conditioning, and um, my my father, who passed a year ago, he was a Baptist preacher.
remember now. Yeah.
So there are interesting, very very personal, very direct examples that I have of ways that created power over dynamics,
Hmm.
of ways that as I was kind of trying to rise into my own individuation and my own power, that I was told, you're not allowed to speak up to me because whatever, like there would be Bible verses thrown at me.
Huh. Oh yeah.
um
Oh yeah. First Timothy, First Corinthians. Women hating is arguably what. Anyway, go on. Sorry.
I have a different understanding of that these days because, again, I care so much about context. I feel like you could get tired of hearing that word from me, but knowing the social context of Paul speaking to these things, we could have a whole other conversation there about religious trauma and healing from religious trauma, because I have come back to a place where I feel a lot of endearment and sweetness and softness toward the Christian religion and the Christian faith and the practice of worshiping and following Jesus and his teachings.
Huh.
Um, and and I can hold that yes and of like, and some of that was not okay. Some of that is absolutely power over reinforcement.
Yep.
Um, Set and setting, though, man, I want to bring in set and setting as a trauma informed technique, and make it an even more flexible tool, because if a conversation is not working inside and you move it outside
Huh.
into a more spacious environment with a sky and a breeze and a sunshine and a grass.
Wow. That was simple.
So
Of course.
simple. So simple.
I
Like
don't
we're cut off from our resources because of our set and setting. We're cut off from so many of our resources. Go touch grass together. Go smell the smell of petrichor because it just rained. Because we're having a very rainy summer. It's a beautiful thing here in Texas.
It is indeed.
So, um, when we're talking about some of these things, like what's the simplest resource that we're cut off from right now that could infuse a little bit more grace into this conversation. Can both of us take a little lemon balm tea or tulsi now and then have the conversation? Like, we are surrounded by the resources that nature offers us, and then we get cut off from those because we're so in our minds. Um, yeah.
Yeah, this brings me all the way back to last week we were texting and I told you well I implied this. I didn't tell you outright, but I told you that confession is a co-regulation ritual on the high side. On the low side, which I'm hearing now, I look at the psychogeography of the architecture compared to a free sky and a green grass, right? And I think, oh, that may have that power on the high side, but on the low side, it's actually reinforcing a very particular structure of power architecturally, where it was happening, how it was delivered. And yeah, this set and setting thing, you could push it so many different directions. And yeah, I mean, I do my best to ground in the sun in nature 2 hours a day.
Yeah, nice.
And I feel different. And there's this whole host of benefits to just being how we're meant to be before and without the antipathy, I guess, of structures and systems.
Yeah. And our brain will create metaphors and references and associations based on the things we have the most experiences with. So if we have more experiences with technology, then we'll start basing our metaphors and our associations on why people are the way they are, based on what they've downloaded and based on what their bandwidth is.
Hmm.
Versus, uh, one of the things that I'm constantly reprogramming with myself and clients is like, remember that we are nature. And if you are not nature, then so often you're a product on a shelf that can be labeled as the right product, the wrong product. It has too much acidity, it has too much salt, it has too much of this ingredient, it has the wrong ingredients, it has the wrong branding, it has the wrong packaging, it's in the wrong bottle. But you go outside and you are nature, trees are trees, and flowers and vines are flowers and vines, and the way they grow makes sense because of the way the sun hit it. This is a reference to Ram Dass teachings,
Hmm.
uh, of like you that a tree makes sense the way it grows and
Hmm.
why it has grown that way. Um, so yeah, remembering nature as the free resource for all of us, I think it's fantastic.
The resource that keeps resourcing itself. I mean, just looking, I could show you the plants on my desk that have been here since 2021, and they know how to get what they need and to share their beauty and stuff. Like snaking around and anyway,
I don't know what is a good wrap up to the conversation here.
yeah, I was feeling that. Um, Zooming back all the way in, past this beautiful comment of you already being in the solution when you talk about people with trauma have superpowers. Like it's already in the end result of them cultivating that awareness and responsibility. Um, Bringing it back all the way to dating too and relating. What are the differences between trauma dumping versus authenticity?
Mm.
How do we communicate the borders of our consent? And I can repeat that later when that second one a little bit later if we want to take a lot on the first. It's either way.
The the difference changes based on the listener.
Mm,
If I'm in an environment with a mixed group of people,
mm,
then if I make a reference to an adversity, or a trauma, then I'm making that reference from like a eagle eye view of like that thing. I'm naming the thing. I'm naming it truly, authentically, but I'm not in it sharing the visceral experience of it
mm,
until I've gotten a really good, clear cue from every single person that they have the capacity to hold that without it throwing them into a trauma response. So
Simple.
simple. Yeah, that's in a group setting. In a one-on-one setting, I'll feel it out. I might start talking about the thing and then have to pause and be like, wait a second. I didn't ask if you were available for this conversation. And that's how I rewind, reset. But often, especially, I have the beautiful privilege of the friend group that I've cultivated around me is very skilled. And we ask each other this. Do you have space to hear this thing right now? Do you have space to hear something intense right now? It has to do with my mom. It has to do with my relationship. It has to do with some trauma that I've been processing in therapy. It has to do with trauma that I'm not ready to process in therapy.
Grace of a buffer of consent. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. And then in relationship, do you have space to hear something that I've been challenged by lately? Do you have space to hear something that I've been bothered about lately? Do you have space?
which answers the question of my initial conversation and experience on the date, where there was just two lines that if I had put it in quotes, I think would have actually been enough of a buffer because it was me going into a story based on the past and looking at how the caliber and quality of women I date has dramatically increased over what I've experienced in the past and how that's like it was a little uncomfortable and trying to get to the victory of like, oh, I'm able to live here and there's something fun and new but also uncomfortable about it. Like ideally, if I had been sensitive and informed ahead of time, I could have asked, was it, do you have the space to hear or listen to something that I went through in relation to you
Mm-hmm.
that I've actually also surpassed in service of our connection deepening and being more easeful for me?
Yeah, I
But
imagine
an
it.
upgrade? This is I
Yeah,
can hear something.
it's an upgrade for sure. I imagine it like uh, trauma can be like a baseball that you're throwing at somebody real fast.
Mm,
So that question of do you have space? It's like they get a chance to be ready with their catcher's mitt on,
mm.
facing you.
Oh yeah, wow, yeah.
You get the chance to get ready for it. And that makes all the difference in the world. If you're just talking about this other thing and then all of a sudden you drop a trauma bomb,
Mm,
it's like it hits you in the side of the face. You weren't ready to hold that. You weren't ready to catch it. You weren't ready to be able to do anything with it. You didn't have your catcher's mitt on. You're unprotected. It's like it can hit you in a weak spot, in a wounded spot, and you didn't know this, but I'm already stressed out because I just got this call about this bill and the thing and the student loans and the and in the world as it is. Like I'm already in a frenetic place and I had no ability to be able to hold this for you right now. And so now we're both spiraling instead of just prepping the conversation effectively.
window dressing, framing, context, inviting into a game. Like come play. Are you down to come play this game with me? Yeah, I'll put on my catcher's mitt and my my umpire face. This is
Please, gear. Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
that's great.
Protect my vulnerable parts real fast.
Hey, yeah. Let me put on the armor as I go into the depths of your pain with you. Um, my marketing coach yesterday, he was like, "Yeah, for your ads, it's like you put on a hazmat suit and then you wade into their pool of poop, and you look around and you say, 'This really sucks. I'm sorry that it hurts so bad. You want out?'" And how uncomfortable that might be. I see that similarly to anyone who's giving the grace of conversation and communication around trauma, privilege, whatever. Um, we like to play well with others, so it helps to give each other the rules of the game or an opportunity to know what game we're about to play. That's what I hear.
And I think trauma dumping happens when we are in the visceral experience of the thing while we're talking about it instead of reporting after the fact. Like a news reporter is not in the experience of it. A news reporter is reporting the facts and what they've observed.
Mm.
But somebody who's in the midst of it is sharing a nervous system to nervous system communication. And sometimes that is invaluable. I feel so I feel so blessed, so privileged as a person who is a space holder professionally and in my social life too, to be able to get the nervous system to nervous system communication of that's how it feels, this life experience that I've never had, that I don't want to have, frankly, thank you. That's this is, this is how it feels. And you get to look through their eyes and be like, oh, and of course this would stand out instead of this. And of course these things would become more gray and muted in the background. And these would be the things that are priorities. And like, I don't know, it's such a beautiful thing to be able to viscerally experience something with another person when you're ready for it. When you're really ready to go on safari with somebody and like see through the grasses of where the dangers are and where the gifts are and what the beauty is. And that's it's so beautiful. And it's like it's the experience of getting to live multiple lifetimes in one lifetime
Mhm.
when you're ready for it.
Yeah, that's so precious and beautiful because it's like it's this elegant, inviting context for making the choice from sovereignty to go with someone into their world while also having the awareness that that doesn't have to happen now, it doesn't have to happen ever, it doesn't have to happen with me. And in the process, you do not have to take on the emotional labor of being entangled with feeling in your nervous system a current hijack or a previous trauma kernel that has not yet been fully processed or whatever. And I think that probably, if I'm not mistaken, is the underlying commitment of the distinction between trauma dumping versus authentic sharing is like, I don't want to cause sideways harm to someone who they don't have to consent to feel me or to feel my feelings or experiences.
Right.
Hmm.
And on the receiving end, if you know that you have the capacity, you will know that you have the capacity because you will be oriented toward what this person is saying makes sense, or I want to make it make sense.
Hmm.
You'll be oriented toward it as like a bonus life experience that you get to experience, you know, through the eyes of somebody else. If you are still in the place of like feeling like you might have to defend yourself, but I'm not the bad guy here. If you're still in the place of kind of people pleasing, of like, make sure you absolutely know that I'm the safe person here. If you're in the facilitator position of like, let me help you fix this.
Uh-huh.
All of those places are the like, I don't know if I'm fully ready to be able to hold space neutrally. What I can offer is this.
Huh. That's great. That answers my question about, well, lots of things. But so to tie it up, um, and throw it into your dungeon. I'm sorry, that was for predators. That's okay. It's not the same thing. Um, we've deterritorialized people. We've taken them out of the strictures and structures of trauma and then lack of awareness of acting, communicating, and being from their trauma, and lack of awareness being communicating with someone who's coming from trauma. And that was the first podcast, and then a lot of this. And then the second one is re-territorializing, like, all right, now that we've blank slated, what can we aim at as individuals in relationship, in dating, and in a civilization that would make everything go easier and better? Like instead of just two of us lifting the table, now there are maybe four or 20 of us. And it's a table that we all want to sit and eat at together.
Yeah,
And you get the last word.
oh, I just think, yeah, it's a table worth lifting. If that many people agree and consent to lift this edge of the table, then that many people have decided this is a table worth lifting. It's a beautiful thing.
Ah, well, you've certainly made love easy. For a lot of people from a lot of angles. You are a beautiful and a gracious gift. Your expertise, your training. Thank you for being here. Thank you for just doubling the dose for my audience. That's great. And yeah, I think it's what was it? It's Marika Alderink.com and something about
Trauma
trauma.
Informed Austin is where you'll see information about the trainings that I do.
Sweet. Well, thank you again, and thank you all for listening. Please feel free, absolutely, to like, share, subscribe, comment below. Go and make love easy, y'all.